The Buffs, formerly the 3rd Regiment of Foot, was a line infantry regiment of the British Army traditionally raised in the English county of Kent and garrisoned at Canterbury. It had a history dating back to 1572 and was one of the oldest regiments in the British Army, being 3rd in order of precedence. The regiment provided distinguished service over a period of almost 400 years, accumulating 116 battle honours. In 1881, under the Childers reforms, it was known as the Buffs, and later, on the 3rd of June 1935, was renamed the Buffs. In 1961 it was amalgamated with the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment to form the Queen's Own Buffs. The Royal Kent Regiment, which was later merged, on the 31st of December 1966, with the Queen's Royal Surrey Regiment, the Royal Sussex Regiment and the Middlesex Regiment to form the Queen's Regiment, which was again amalgamated with the Royal Hampshire Regiment, in September 1992, to create the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. History. Early history. The origins of the regiment lay in Thomas Morgan's Company of Foot, the London trained bands, which was in existence from 1572 to 1648. They fought in the Low Countries during the Dutch Revolt, taking part in many sieges and battles in that time. In 1665, when the Second Anglo-Dutch War started, the British and Scotch brigades of the Dutch army were ordered to swear loyalty to the stadtholder. Those who disobeyed were cashiered. Using his own funds, Sir George Downing, the English ambassador to the Netherlands, raised the Holland Regiment from the starving remnants of those who refused to sign. In 1665 it was known as the 4th Regiment, and by 1668 as the 4th Regiment. In 1688 to 1689 it was 4th, the Lord High Admiral's Regiment, until 1751 it was named as other regiments after the colonel commanding being the 3rd Regiment of Foot from 1737 to 1743, at which point it became the 3rd Regiment of Foot. Howard's Buffs. The Buffs arises from the need to distinguish the regiment, commanded by Lieutenant General Thomas Howard, from the 19th Regiment of Foot, at the time commanded by the Honourable Sir Charles Howard. The regiment used buff coats made of soft leather, whereas the 19th Regiment used green coats. The nickname, the Old Buffs, arises from the need to distinguish the regiment from the Young Buffs, a nickname for the 31st Regiment of Foot, in between the campaigns of the Napoleonic Wars and India. The Buffs had a tour of service from 1821 until 1827 in the British colony of New South Wales. For the duration of the service, the Buffs were divided into 4 detachments. The first was based in Sydney from 1821. The second arrived in Hobart in 1822. The third, entitled the Buffs Headquarters, arrived in Sydney in 1823. The fourth arrived in Sydney in 1824, but variously saw service throughout the colonies, being stationed at Port Dalrymple, Parramatta, Liverpool, Newcastle, Port Macquarie and Bathurst. The regiment reunited and was transferred to Calcutta in 1827. During the service in New South Wales, the Buffs were commanded by Lieutenant Colonel W. Stewart and Lieutenant Colonel C. Cameron. In 1858, the 2nd Battalion was stationed in Malta. Lieutenant John Cotter, adjutant of the 2nd Buffs, would shout, "Steady, the Buffs," a shout which has entered common parlance. The 1st Battalion saw action in the Taku Forts action during the Second Opium War as well as in the Perak War, while the 2nd Battalion saw action in the Anglo-Zulu War. In the Childers reforms of 1881 the regiment became the Buffs. The East Kent Militia became the regiment's 3rd Battalion and its short-lived 4th Battalion. At the same time 2 Kent Rifle Volunteer Corps were redesignated as the 1st Volunteer Battalion and 2nd Volunteer Battalion of the Buffs. The 1st Battalion saw action in the Anglo-Egyptian War, and the 2nd Battalion, 3rd Battalion, 1st Volunteer Battalion and 2nd Volunteer Battalion all saw action during the Second Boer War, with Captain Naunton Henry Virtue of the 2nd Battalion serving as Brigade Major to the 11th Infantry Brigade under Major General Edward Woodgate at the Battle of Spion Kop, where he was mortally wounded in January 1900. First World War. For service in the First World War, 10 additional battalions were raised. Regular Army. The 1st Battalion remained in Fermoy as part of the 16th Brigade in the 6th Division, and the 2nd Battalion returned from Madras in December 1914 and remained in England as part of the 85th Brigade in the 28th Division. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion remained in Canterbury as a training unit. Territorial Force. The 1/4th Battalion sailed for India in October 1914, while the 1/5th Battalion sailed for India in October 1914 and then transferred to Mesopotamia in November 1915. The 2/4th Battalion, the 2/5th Battalion, the 3/4th Battalion and the 3/5th Battalion all remained in England throughout the war, while the 10th Battalion was formed in Egypt in February 1917 and then transferred to France as part of the 230th Brigade in the 74th Division. New armies. The 6th Battalion, 7th Battalion, 8th Battalion and 9th Battalion were all formed for active service in France. Corporal William Richard Cotter was awarded the VC whilst serving with the 6th Battalion. After the end of the First World War, a small number of men from several battalions saw action during the Third Anglo-Afghan War in 1919. Second World War. The 1st Battalion served in many different brigades and divisions, mainly with British Indian Army units, and fought in many different battles and campaigns such as the North African Campaign, the Italian Campaign and the Battle of Anzio, when they were a part of 18th Infantry Brigade, assigned to the 1st Infantry Division, where they were involved in some of the fiercest fighting of the war. The 18th Brigade returned to the 1st Armoured Division in August 1944, but on the 1st of January 1945 the division was disbanded and 18th Brigade was broken up and used as replacements for other units. The 1st Buffs spent the rest of the war with the 24th Guards Brigade attached to the 56th Infantry Division. With the 56th Division, the battalion fought in Operation Grapeshot, the final offensive in Italy, which effectively ended the campaign in Italy. The 2nd Battalion was sent to France in 1940 with the 132nd Infantry Brigade attached to 44th Infantry Division to join the British Expeditionary Force and fought in the short but fierce Battle of Dunkirk and were evacuated at Dunkirk back to Britain. The 44th Division were sent to fight in the North African Campaign, where it was broken up due to an apparently poor performance in the Battle of Alam el Hafa, despite the division having only the 132nd Brigade under command, as other brigades were attached to other divisions. The 132nd Brigade disbanded and 2nd Buffs then was transferred to the Far East with the 26th Indian Infantry Brigade and remained there for the war. In 1944 the brigade was redesignated the 26th British Infantry Brigade, which itself became part of the 36th British Infantry Division and served with the British 14th Army in the Burma Campaign. The 4th Battalion Buffs was a first-line territorial army unit serving with the BEF in France 1940. The battalion was transferred to the island of Malta in 1941 and served throughout the siege. The battalion then joined the 234th Infantry Brigade. The brigade took part in the disastrous Battle of Leros in an attempt to capture the Dodecanese Islands in late 1943. The brigade and other Allied forces, mainly Italian, attempted to hold the island from the Germans but without success. This was due mainly to German air superiority, as the Allies had very few planes to cover them. The 234th Brigade commander, Robert Tilney, ordered the surrender after many days of resistance and hard fighting. The 5th Battalion was reformed in 1939 as a second-line duplicate of the 4th Battalion, raised when the Territorial Army was doubled in size. The battalion also saw service in France 1940 with the 12th Infantry Division, which itself was a second-line duplicate of the 44th Division. The 5th Buffs were serving 6th and 7th Royal West Kents in the 36th Infantry Brigade. Like the 2nd and 4th Battalions, they served with the BEF in France in 1940 and fought in the Battle of France and were evacuated at Dunkirk. The 12th Division suffered heavy casualties due mainly to most of the men having little training and the division having no artillery or support units. After returning to England, the division was disbanded in July 1940 due to the casualties it sustained. In 1942, the 36th Brigade was assigned to the newly raised 78th Division and took part in Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa, followed by the campaign in Tunisia, where the 78th Division, as part of the British First Army, distinguished itself during the crucial capture of Longstop Hill. The division then fought in the Sicilian Campaign, as part of the British 8th Army. The 5th Buffs and the rest of 78th Division then took part in the fighting in Italy and served there for the rest of the war until the 1945 offensive. The Buffs also raised many more battalions during the war, mainly for home defense or as training units. None, save the 7th Battalion, saw active service overseas. The 7th Battalion was raised in 1940 and was converted to the 141st Regiment Royal Armoured Corps in 1941 due to the shortage of armoured troops in the British Army. Post-war in 1961, the regiment was amalgamated with the Queen's Own Royal West Kent Regiment to form the Queen's Own Buffs. The Royal Kent Regiment, which was later merged on the 31st of December 1966 with the Queen's Royal Surrey Regiment, the Royal Sussex Regiment and the Middlesex Regiment to form the Queen's Regiment, which was again amalgamated with the Royal Hampshire Regiment in September 1992 to create the Princess of Wales's Royal Regiment. Colonels-in-Chief. The Colonels-in-Chief were as follows: 1689 to 1708 Prince George of Denmark kilogram, 1906 1914 H.M. King Frederick VIII of Denmark kg, GCB, GCVO. 1914-1947 H.M. King Christian X of Denmark kg, GCB, GCVO. 1947-1961 H.M. King Frederick IX of Denmark kg, GCB, GCVO. Colonels. The colonels were as follows: 1665 to 1668 Col. Robert Sidney, 1668 to 1673 Marge Gen. Sir Walter Vane, 1673 to 1682 Lt. Gen. John Sheffield, Duke of Buckingham and 3rd Earl of Mulgrave kilogram, 1682 to 1684 Col. Philip Stanhope, 2nd Earl of Chesterfield, 1684 to 1685 Lt. Gen. John Sheffield, Duke of Buckingham and 3rd Earl of Mulgrave kilogram, 1685 to 1688 Brig Gen. Sir Theophilus Oglethorpe, 1688 to 1707 Gen. Charles Churchill, 1707 to 1711 FM. John Campbell, 2nd Duke of Argyll, kg, KT, 1711 to 1713 Col. John Selwyn, 1713 to 1715 Brig Gen. Archibald Douglas, 2nd Earl of Forfar, 1716–1725 Gen. Sir Charles Wills, K.B., 1726–1729 Col. Thomas Pitt, 1st Earl of Londonderry, 1729–1737 Lt. Gen. William Tatton, 1737–1749 Lt. Gen. Thomas Howard, 1749–1763 FM Sir George Howard, K.B., 1763–1764 Col. John Crawford, 1764–1768 March Gen. Ralph Burton, 1768–1779 F.M. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, 1st Baron Amherst, K.B. 1779–1786 Lt. Gen. William Style, 1786–1809 Gen. Thomas Hall, 1809–1815 Gen. Charles Lee, 1815–1829 Lt. Gen. Sir Henry Clinton, GCB, GCH, 1829–1832 Gen. Sir George Donne, GCB, GCH, 1832–1845 Gen. Kenneth Alexander Howard, 1st Earl of Effingham, GCB, 1845–1854 Gen. Sir Henry King, CB, KCH, KC, 1854–1857 Lt. Gen. Sir Nathaniel Thorne, KCB, KH, 1857 Lt. Gen. Nicholas Wodehouse, 1857 March Gen. Sir Henry Havelock, KCB, 1857–1860 Lt. Gen. Berkeley Drummond, 1860–1863 Gen. The Hon. Charles Grey, 1863–1864 Lt. Gen. John Wharton Frith, 1864–1870 Lt. Gen. Dayhord MacDougall, 1870–1874 Lt. Gen. The Hon. Sir James Lindsay, KCMG, 1874–1882 Gen. William Craig Emilius Napier, 1882–1909 Gen. Sir Julius Augustus Robert Rains, GCB, 1909 March Gen. Frederick Taylor Hobson, 1909–1914 March Gen. Robert George Kirkewik, 1914–1928 Gen. Sir Arthur Henry Fitzroy Paget, GCB, KCVO, 1928–1937 March Gen. Sir Arthur Lyndon Bell, KCB, KCMG, 1937–1943 March Gen. Sir John Kennedy, GBE, CB, CMG, DSO, 1943–1953 March Gen. The Hon. Percy Gerald Scarlett, CB, MC, 1953–1961 March Gen. Valentine Boucher, CB, CBE. Notable soldiers. During the Battle of Albuera, Ensign Thomas, who was surrounded and was called upon to surrender, shouted, "Only with my life." He only gave up the colour after being cut down and mortally wounded. Also during the Battle of Albuera, Lieutenant Latham seized the colour and defended it with heroic gallantry, refusing to yield it to the enemy, instead concealing it in his jacket, where it was later found. The action is commemorated by the Latham centerpiece, now in the Regimental Museum. During the Battle of Taku Forts, Private John Moyes was captured. He was later executed by Chinese soldiers for refusing to kowtow to a local mandarin. His act of defiance was later immortalized in The Private of the Buffs, a poem by Sir Francis Hastings Doyle. Among the small garrison of 1879 Rorke's Drift was Sergeant Frederick Milne's 2nd Battalion, the Buffs, said to have found and retrieved the water cart during the night. He survived the battle and soon left the service. The war artist Ernest Stafford Carlos was commissioned into the 8th Battalion in 1916, arriving in the Artois sector of the Western Front early in 1917. His sketches, cartoons and paintings record life in and behind the lines at the time. He was killed in action during the Battle of Messines on 15 June 1917 while his unit was assaulting a German-held spoil heap near Zillebeek in Flanders, a feature that became known as Buff's Bank. He is buried close to the battlefield at Chester Farm Commonwealth War Graves Commission Cemetery. Among the soldiers in the 10th Battalion, one soldier showed bravery in the Battle of Epernay on 18 September 1918. This was Private Percy James Fellows, a Lewis gunner who was mortally wounded while facing the enemy. He was serving with the 230th Brigade of the 74th Division. He died of wounds suffered during the final advance in Artois on 13 October 1918. Captain William Douglas Home, who served in the 7th Battalion in the Second World War, refused to obey orders, because he feared that thousands of French civilians would be killed, and was duly imprisoned for this. After the war he became a successful playwright. Freedom of the City of London. The regiment was awarded the Freedom of the City of London, giving them the right to march through the city. Battle honours. The honours in bold were worn on the colours. Earlier wars: Blenheim, Ramillies, Oudenarde, Malplaquet, Dettingen, Guadeloupe 1759, Douro, Talavera, Albuera, Vitoria, Pyrenees, Nivelles, Nive, Orthes, Toulouse, Peninsula, Punjab, Sevastopol, Taku Forts, South Africa 1879, Chitral, Relief of Kimberley, Paardeberg, South Africa 1900-02. First World War in 1914, Armentières 1914, Ypres 1915-17, Gravenstafel Street, Julian, Frezenberg, Bellewaerde, Hooge 1915, Luz, Somme 1916-18, Albert 1916-18, Basington, Delville Wood, Pozières, Flers, Corslet, Morville, Thiepval, Le Transloy, Ancre Heights, Ancre 1916-18, Arras 1917, Scarpa 1917, Messines 1917, Pilkham, Passchendaele, Cambrai 1917-18, Street, Quinton, Havre, Amiens, Bapaume 1918, Hindenburg Line, EPE Acute HY, Street, Quinton Canal, Celle, Samba, France and Flanders 1914-18, Struma, Doran 1918, Macedonia 1915-18, Gaza, Jerusalem, Tel Asur, Palestine 1917-18, Aden, Tigris 1916, Kut al-Amara 1917, Baghdad, Mesopotamia 1915-18. Second World War. Defensive Esco Street, Omar Abbasiyeh, withdrawal to Sen, Northwest Europe 1940, Sidi Suleiman, Alam Hamza, Elam El Hafa, El Alamein, El Agila, advance on Tripoli, Tibaga Gap, El Hamma, Akarit, Djebel Azag 1943, Robar Valley, Djebel Bekchekea Ui, Haidas Maljes Plain, Long Stop Hill 1943. North Africa 1941-43, Centuripa, Monte Rivaglia, Sicily 1943, Termoli, Trinia, Sangro, Anzio, Cassino, Ilieri Valley, Aquino, Rome, Trasimene Line, Coriano, Monte Spaduro, Senio, Arganda Gap, Italy 1943-45, Lee Rose, Middle East 1943, Malta 1940-42, Schwelly, Myadson, Burma 1945. Victoria Cross. The following members of the regiment were awarded the Victoria Cross: Major Frederick Francis Maud, Crimean War; Private John Connors, Crimean War; Corporal James Smith, First Mo Monde Campaign; Lance Corporal William Richard Cotter, World War I, uniform and insignia. In 1667 the Holland Regiment is recorded as wearing red jackets lined with yellow. Subsequently, Nathan Brooke's Army List of 1684 referred to coated red, lined with a flesh color. This marked the beginning of the historic association of the regiment with buff facings. A notice in the London Gazette of the 21st of January 1685 describing the clothing of 3 deserters from what was still the Holland Regiment, referred for the first time to the color buff, a new red coat lined with a buff-colored lining, surtout sleeves, cross pockets with 3 scallops, large plain pewter buttons, breeches of THS same color as the coat lining. An illustration of the colonel's color in 1707 shows a dragon on a buff background. Following the award of this distinctive symbol to the regiment as a reward for its gallant conduct on all occasions, according to the Army historian Richard Cannon in a book published in 1839. The dragon was believed to have been adopted as it was one of the supporters of the royal arms of Elizabeth I, who issued the warrant for the raising of the regiment in 1572. Through the remainder of the 18th century both the dragon and the buff facings remained as particular distinctions of the regiment. A royal warrant of 1751 standardizing all colors, badges and uniforms listed the 3rd Regiment, or the Buffs. The Buffs were at this time the only infantry regiment to owe their official title to the facing colors. The green dragon was recorded in the same document as the ancient badge of the Buffs, displayed as a woven or painted device on the mitre cap of the regiment's grenadiers. The colors and the drums. In 1881 the reorganization of most infantry regiments on a territorial basis under the Childers reforms led to the newly renamed the Buffs losing its buff facings in favor of the white collars and cuffs intended to distinguish all non-Royal English and Welsh regiments. The dragon survived as part of the headdress badge, although replaced on collars by the White Horse of Kent. The horse had formed the insignia of the East Kent Militia, with formed the 3rd Battalion of the new regiment. Both changes were unpopular within the regiment, and in 1887 the Buffs were authorized to convert the white facings on the scarlet tunics to buff, at the regiment's expense and using a pipe clay mixture developed by an officer of the 2nd Battalion. In 1890 buff was officially restored as the regimental color on flags, tunics and mess jackets. On the 23rd of May 1894 approval was given for the dragon to be resumed as the collar badge. Alliances. Canada, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. Regimental Museum. The Buffs Regimental Museum is located at Canterbury, Kent, though ownership of the museum's objects was transferred to the National Army Museum in London in 2000. It closed for maintenance from November 2008 until 2012, with its collections being housed at the National Army Museum's London base during that period.